Sasha Thompson is a respected and certified DEI coach. For the next 30 minutes, we'll get an exclusive look at some of her conversations with others in the field. Welcome to DEI After 5.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to DEI After 5. This episode is one that I think so many of you will get just nuggets of information from. As practitioners or as folks that are in the DEI space, we often get connected to people through LinkedIn or some other social community or network. And this guest, my next guest, is someone that I've been following for a while. And his approach to this work and his unapologetic stance in this work is something that I just absolutely love, and I think we need to have more of it. And so today I want to welcome my guest, Farzad. And just first of all, this is the first time like you and I've actually had like conversation, but we've been following each other for a while. Like, for a while. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the kind words. I mean, it's reciprocal. I've been following you for quite some time, and I'm so honored that I'm here.
Thank you. So let's start off with, how did you get into this work? Because most of us did not, at least when we started a few years back, it wasn't like, oh yeah, I want to be in diversity and inclusion. So how did you get into this work?
Yeah, thank you. So, it haphazardly, I think, like most people. In my 20s, I did a lot of work with human rights. I come from an ethnic minority in Iran, and I did a lot of work. Kind of doing advocacy for my own community, and then linguistic and cultural rights in Iran and the greater Middle East. And I got a chance to kind of travel and speak to those things, and visit Europe, visit the UN, and kind of talk about a lot of these things, and represent my people, and kind of do some work on democratization and stuff like that in my 20s. Traveled a bit. I did a kind of had like a late quarter life crisis, or like when I was hitting my 30s, and then did a study abroad, came back to the US, and when I came back, like I was just kind of, hey, I got to start all over again kind of thing, and found a job at a local university, George Mason, which was close to me in Northern Virginia. One thing led to another. I was working in human resources, talent acquisition, and then I was like, look, I have all these like skills and identity, like it was identity conflict and things like that, but like a lot of transferable skills. So I started lobbying for myself and picking up some DEI stuff because I thought it was very relevant. Until like the idea was to eventually transition back into doing human rights work, and then so like I just liked it a lot, and then one thing led to another. I was doing recruiting for diversity. Then I was doing more and more DEI projects. Went to private sector, got a job doing full-time DEI work, and that encompassed all of this stuff. And then local government, got a chance to work with equity as well, racial equity, not just within the workforce, but also the people we're serving. So that kind of blended my human rights background a little bit. So that was, I love that. And then I started Critical Equity summer of 2020, upon the urging of a lot of friends and family, saying like, you can do this alone. You can do this on the side. You don't need to kind of be at the mercy of an organization. So yeah, that's how I got here. I think it was not a very straight path. It was moving back and forth, and just kind of fell into it.
I appreciate that path and that story, because I think it makes so much sense. Having followed you for a while, seeing that human rights piece tie into your post, right? And the work that you do. And so one of the things that really stood out for me was you talk a lot about liberation and power. And for most DEI practitioners, right, we're still having this conversation about equity and inclusion and belonging, which is a whole other story. But, this is almost seen as radical,
Yeah.
right, in this space. It's, this isn't about appeasing sensitivities or, coddling fragility, right?
Right.
This is okay. Let's take this to the next level. This is kind of DEI 202, 302, 402 type stuff, right? So, what would you say is kind of the difference or needed in that transition from where we are now to this conversation around power and liberation?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I think I've been thinking a lot about this. I've been doing this work for some time, and I spent a lot of time designing interventions and kind of trainings and figuring out like ways to interact properly in the workplace without levying harm and stuff like that. And I've been doing all this work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just to do these interventions, get people excited, and then within weeks, like people revert back to the same old
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. And so um, I made the decision over at some time when I realized that equity was an interim step, right? It's what you have to do to get somewhere, right? You're seeking justice, right? And then so like I thought like why don't we we're designing all of these things to get there, and it's been decades that we're trying to do this. Why don't we
Mm-hmm.
just go straight to it? Like let's just yeah, we're developing equity programs and stuff like that, but let's really call out the justice that we want to see and bring that closer to us, rather than kind of talking about it from so many layers removed that we got to do this, then we got to do this, that we got to then finally receive justice. And so I started doing a lot of research, and I'm like, okay, so all of my, the entire DEI field and a lot of what I've learned so far and all of my interventions are going from the individual layer to the cultural layer. We're finally realizing
Mm-hmm.
that environments shape behaviors and all these things that we need to, and then the cultural layer also is not that deep, right? It's still dependent on structures and power and systems, right? So I decided, like, okay, at some point we have to go start talking about those systems that eventually influence culture, that eventually influence
Mm-hmm.
individual behavior. So in our systems, societally, we talk about how our democracy is designed, right? But what does that look like for organizations? That's organizational design, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we democratize society, we have the more we democratize. I mean, there are layers of democracy, right? There's representative and all the way to full participation, direct democracy. And there's even variations of full-on participation in democracy. So then I'm like, okay, so I have this background in international affairs and democratization and things like that. So why not just kind of use that for the workplace? And if we spend
Right.
not 8 hours a day in the workplace in these authoritarian systems, right, where we have to appeal to those at the top, like we're begging people who have power over us to be nicer to us and to
Hmm.
promote us and to do all things for us when we should have the power, when we should distribute the power. And so it's radical um, in that the people at the top don't like it. It's
Right.
But if you ask majority of society, as individual contributors or even like managers, that wouldn't you rather have some degree of say in decision making and distribute in more wealth generated from your labor? Isn't that appealing to you? Like everybody except for C-suite would say yes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they would be, the C-suite would be ceding some power and possibly some wealth. So it's not radical in the sense that um, it's like people don't accept it. It's radical in the sense that those at the top don't want you to talk about these things. And
The
so
power shift.
yeah, exactly. It's a
Yeah.
complete shift in the power paradigm, both in the workplace and resultantly throughout society. So to make a long story short, we went from individual to cultural. Now we got to go from cultural to systemic, true
Right.
systemic. Like how is power distributed? Because unless you do that, you are still appealing to people's like humanity. And
Right.
to some degree, it may work. You might have some marginal reform over time, but we don't need that. We need a complete overhaul. We need revolutionary approaches because
Hmm.
people are dying, and also the planet's dying. So it has to be much more drastic in order for us to survive and to live really.
Right. I love what you're saying, because I think it is a shift that needs to take place. And it's, how do you get people to see that if they let go of some of that power, that it'll impact and help everyone succeed, right? And so it's changing mindsets of, and you talk about this a little bit in your work too, around, the place that capitalism plays in
Mhm.
all of this, and who benefits from that, especially in this DEI space. And I've had conversations with other, folks in this space, other professionals in this space, and there's a frustration that those that are the most marginalized that are doing this work tend to get the least amount of this work, right? And aren't necessarily paid, not just for their lived experience, but for their professional experience as well in this space. And then you see the folks that are making the money, right? Big dollars, um, in this space, that aren't marginalized, probably in very many ways. And so you start to see how capitalism eats into this justice work and what that looks like, and aligning values and words and actions. And so, yeah.
No, I love. I mean, a lot of what I talk about is rooted in capitalism, and not just because how capitalism tends to concentrate wealth and power in the hands of a few, and because it's developed by Europeans over the centuries, it's going to be maintained by Europeans over the centuries and their descendants in
Hmm.
the U.S., Canada, Australia, South Africa, right? So, and resultantly throughout the globe, right? So, white supremacy and capitalism go hand in hand. So, even that aside, even if you okay, that's we take that as a given. Also, our organizations are designed to prop this up too. So,
Hmm.
capitalism is maintained through a hierarchy. Like once you distribute power and wealth, it's no longer capitalism. It's cooperative economics.
Right.
So, and you're not competing with one another. You're actually like collaborating and finding ways to distribute your wealth and your labor to where it needs to be to maintain society. So, but not for the purpose of making rich people even richer. So capital isn't deployed at the whim of the hands of a few.
Right.
Capital is deployed based on how society determines
Collective.
it's needed, right? And so our organizations do the same thing. So our organizations are
Mhm.
rooted in capitalist hierarchy where concentration goes all the way to the top. Now, once you distribute, right, once you flatten the organization out, it becomes less and less capitalistic and more beneficial, for everyone, right? So I talk about like both capitalism as a system, but also the cultural effects of capitalism. Like what does it do to our minds, right? And
Mm.
so for leaders, in these very hierarchical structures, right? We've heard the term, or we've heard the phrase "absolute power corrupts absolutely." And there's multiple layers to that. Like yes, it's corruptive, as like we know that, but also like it's so stressful, right? We put a lot of risk and responsibility into these individuals. When I'm talking to leaders and they're like, why should I care? And I'm like, well, imagine you've you've created an environment where people are in your organization where people are able to kind of contribute freely and generate ideas. Psychological safety is actually built in because the power is diffused. There's no
Right.
differentials in power. And so when something happens, when something goes wrong, like you're not forced to resign. It's the entire organization is at fault because you've had multiple mechanisms and multiple eyes on a particular issue, that you can generate ideas from how to solve that in real time through the collective, right? And
Mhm.
so that part of it is appealing. Like, okay, well, like, even for man, like, the great, we're talking about the Great Resignation and stuff, and it's nonstop talking about individual contributors, but managers aren't doing well either.
No, not at all.
So it's just a lot of weight to carry in a hierarchical organization. But in these, it's just in these distributed power structures, right, where we eventually get to what we call self-managed organizations or self-management. It's just a much more of a weight is lifted on you, and you're relying on, and what we should be relying is innately in our human nature, is the power of the collective.
Yeah.
So so yeah, there's benefits kind of to all of this.
This
All
is really tying into the conversation I had with Dia Kana, right,
right.
about just the importance of community. And we were talking about it from, practitioner standpoint, but then also it touched into exactly what you're saying. It's if there's this distribution of quote unquote power, um, the onus isn't just on one person to
Right.
lift the weight or to carry the weight. It's the community is there. And if one person falls, there's somebody there to pick it up. Right.
Absolutely.
And that's an understood aspect of being a part of that community. And so when you look at it from a corporate structure or how we're looking at some of these organizations, you're really asking them to like, let's dismantle the structure, right?
Right.
So that it is equitable. Yes, you can still make money, right? You can still serve your customers, but how you do that in a way that allows for everyone to be a part of and feel as if they're valued as a part of this larger system brings so you can probably get so much more out of that than what you're seeing right now, right? You'll get less turnover, which
Yeah.
I think there was some statistic that I saw. It was like over, $7,000 per person just when someone announces that they're resigning, right? That's
Wow.
not the added amount of, now having to find someone to fill that role, et cetera, et cetera. So you're really looking at this as, okay, how can we totally rethink and reshape how we operate as an organization so that everyone can benefit, everyone is successful, and everyone has what they need in order to be successful.
Mhm.
Um, so that is just something I don't think a lot of practitioners think about as they're doing this work,
Right.
because it's how do we do this work in the system that we're already in, which may not change anything.
Yeah, I mean, that's by design. I think a lot of
Yeah, yeah.
DEI come from the management field and not from, and that's why, like, you know, I don't want to toot my own horn, but like I grew up differently, right? I grew up through the area of human rights, and I understood democratization. I grew up as an anti-capitalist, right? So I think I bring this approach to my work, and um, I came to find out, like, over time, like, I'm not alone here. There's a lot of people,
Hmm.
a lot of research on this. And going back to your point about attrition, a lot of cooperatives and a lot of self-managed organizations have near 100% rates of retention,
Yeah.
because, like, it's not this, like, you're not consistently striving to go up. First off, you're paid very well. Everybody's
Hmm.
paid because it's distributed, and you're not striving to, like, go up the chain as a success. Like, your success is defined by how you're contributing, and you're just picking up skills and contributing where it needs to be, right?
Hmm.
As opposed to your the management consultant Gary Hamilton, Greg Hamill, I'm sorry, talks about how people are like Swiss Army knives, but these job functions, like, force you to use just one tool,
Yeah.
right? And so and this ties back to all to this concept of liberation, right? How are you truly liberated in the workplace? And so when I'm talking through these things, this is so important for DEI as well, because, like,
Mm.
your liberation of your wealth, your promotion, like promotions too, like your material being, your labor is tied to your identity, and your liberation of your identity is tied to your wealth, right? And so we're trying to bridge the gaps and bridge these disparities, um, And so, which is where I'm coming from, which is I originated from, racial justice and kind of identity-based justice. And so I'm approaching this field from this end, as opposed to, hey, I'm interested in distributive economics, and I'm looking at it. I want to learn more about racial justice. So, but like,
Right.
the people that are coming from both ends are reaching these same conclusions that, wow, like these arrangements are so much better. And then when you go to different parts of the world, not just different parts of the country, but different parts of the world, you see how these arrangements, like these cooperative arrangements, are doing wonders for the most harmed in society, right? They
Yeah.
band together, they create these like uh, corporations or organizations that are distributed, and so it makes much more natural sense to them, to their cultures. And also it is liberationist, right? So people are like being freed from just the daily grind of trying to, like the hamster wheel, basically trying to kind of,
Yeah.
you know, run through
Keep
and
up. And
keep up. Yeah, exactly.
you said something just now, it just clicked for me. I was just like, oh, going out on my own was liberation. Like I thought, I knew it was, but I think for me at the time, it was more out of self-care is what comes to mind, because I was just dealing in such a toxic environment for me. But the aha that I had recently was, someone sent me a job description and I was just like, I have so much more to offer than this job description. And it's being able to tap into all of the talents that you have to be able to work in a way that you're not stuck in an environment that sucks the energy and life out of you, because you have to fit into this particular box in order to do what they deem as successful.
Right.
Right. And so, I find in this work over the last, 2 years, I absolutely love being able to put multiple hats on. Right. And I love that you do come from a background that's very different than the quote unquote typical DEI background, right? So many people come from HR, and that's a whole other conversation. And that's probably a thread that people know now on this show, is like, that's not the end all be all,
Right.
right? Of this. It's interdisciplinary, it's understanding and knowing. My background was in sociology, and I focused on cultural diversity and ethnicity. So I wanted to know and understand like how different cultures operated, what was important to them, because it's all not the same.
Right.
And so if you bring people from different cultures into an organization that has a very particular culture, naturally it's not going to always fit, right? And so how do you create one that meets all of the needs of all the cultures that you're pulling together, which is a very different way of how to do this work.
Right.
So I want to do a little bit of a pivot, because one of the things that I saw that you worked on, that I was just like, oh my gosh, this is just freaking brilliant. um, are these tenets of solidarity,
For sure.
right? And so, just for those that don't know, and you can definitely see these on his website, so anti-racism is global. That's
Mhm.
kind of the first tenet. Sovereignty before solidarity. And I
Mhm.
see that on your wall back there. Um,
The custom.
democrat- democratize power, which we talked about.
Mhm.
Democratize risk, and then inoculate the mind.
Mhm.
So I absolutely love those. And again, for anyone, go on his website, it's right there. You can dive deep into those. But there was something that you said that I had to write down, because I want us to talk about this. You said solidarity movements cannot be driven by the beneficiaries of white supremacist capitalism. Instead, all communities must have an equal representation of their unique needs.
Right.
Right. And so that's just kind of what we just talked about. It's there, that sovereignty piece is so critical in this work.
Right.
But we operate in spaces that it's not even an option.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
talk to us. Yeah.
Sure. No, it took me a while to, I mean, a lot of that came from actually my own experience, and then I just like started like investigating a little bit more, and like um, through just conversations that I was seeing from people from in the workplace, online, on social media, and stuff like that, there was always these like these attempts at forced unity, right? Oh, we have to unite rather than divide, and what you're speaking of is divisive, and even on like if you go to the like all spectrums of the American left, they're still doing this. They're like,
Mhm.
these are political divisions. We can't. And then you sit and read into what these are, right? What are these political divisions? And they're literally the needs of communities that are not cis white male, like somewhat middle class and wealthy and above and stuff like that. And so like, and you're like, wow, this is everybody's doing this. And so my whole thing was like, withhold power until you are given an equal seat at the table, right? So like you're not obligated to join a movement where your needs are referred to as political divisions, and I'm talking about communal needs, cultural needs,
Yeah.
or referred to as political divisions, or all these things that are meant to silence you. Yeah, okay, when you have this broad conversation about a universal concept like Medicare for all, that's great. That's going to benefit a lot of people, and benefit a lot of people who've been harmed at a greater rate than white people in America, right? Particularly Black, Indigenous, Latina, some
Mhm.
immigrants, right? Um, Okay, so that's going to benefit all, but that's going to benefit in like the trajectory is going to be like this. It's not going to close the gaps. What we need to do, that's not the be all end all. So if you want people to kind of accept a policy like Medicare for all, you have to also talk about how doctors triage pain. Is
Mm.
pain more valuable than black pain? We've heard a number of reports about people dying because they're in agony, and the doctor isn't like the doctor is like, oh,
Leaving. Yep.
exactly, right. So all of those things, so that's why I'm like, what can we do as groups of people to elevate our voice, and that means that we have to all come to the table with our needs, finding common ground. Does that mean dismissing people and their needs? Finding common ground is finding a base, and then
Mm.
moving, and then incorporating different things from a groundwork. It doesn't mean, hey, only these ideas are important, and those concepts and those needs are will come 5, 10, 15 years after we've done this first, right?
Yeah.
So the concept of sovereignty before solidarity is like, we all have to have our spaces. We need our spaces to represent ourselves and represent our unique needs, and then come to that table as equals. Otherwise, solidarity looks exactly like the same kind of calls from unity that you hear from the right, from the
Yeah.
Trumpists and so on and so forth.
I love that. Um, because even when you hear, again, Medicaid for all, there's so many communities that aren't even captured in that, right? When you think about the disability community and you think about all the hoops that they have to jump through in order just to get some basic medical needs met. It's infuriating, but at the same time, I think that's the importance of why this work has to go beyond just the corporate space. Um, yes, it's something that's within corporate, but it also ties into public sector and education, all of these other pieces of the pie that are trying to skirt around some of these topics. So I just wanted to point that like that was one that stood out for me. Like, yes, okay, I'm down for that. I don't
Yeah.
have to be at your table if you're not willing to even talk about my issues or my needs.
Right.
So I love that. So one of the questions that I always ask my guests is, and then we've talked about it a little bit, is this work takes a lot out of you, right?
Mhm.
This has been your life work. So many of us are in it because we live it every day, like it's our lived experiences. in addition to being educated in this space. And so we do a lot of giving. We do a lot of the research and all of that and sharing and trying to pull others in. And so we're always filling everyone else's cup. And so my question to you is, what do you do to fill your cup? Like, again, I'm in my coconut water today, but what do you do to take care of yourself?
Yeah, that's admittedly something that I can do better with. But I do find solidarity and community, right? Like I've been able to kind of find like a community of people who are very similarly minded and working deeply into the systems and interrogating and uprooting problematic systems. And so we talk, but we also share personal experiences and life experiences, and so I've been very fortunate to find that. Secondly, like it's always a good idea to kind of just find, when we talked about space, retreat into that space, right? Find your
Hmm.
community, find your family, right? And then feel good about that, right? Feel good about exactly why you're doing this. And so like um, a lot of the time, like when I'm spending time with my wife and son, like um, it feels good because like there's a purpose to this, like I don't want him to kind of experience some of the things that I experienced growing up, and some of the hurt that still carries with me, and lastly, you know my presence on social media is kind of like um, both a way of finding like common ground with people, but also a catharsis for me. Like I think a
Hmm.
lot of my posts are just rooted in certain types of anger that I've experienced that I just need to get it out. Like and I know people have experienced certain things the same way, and
Hmm.
so like I use social media as a way of, and of course like. It has to make sense. Other like sometimes I write something down and I read it and I'm like, this doesn't there's no there's a conscious train of thought in this at all. So
Right.
it has to make sense. But like so I rewrite it and things like that. But and I've come to a point where like I've said a lot of what I need to say, and I'm like dialing it back a little bit because at this point it's becoming redundant. But like, I've used that as a way of, people kind of say, oh, like Farzina, like you speak out a lot, like, and I'm like, I don't know if it's courage. Like, it's not. You say it's courage. I don't think it's courage. I just need to get it off my chest. Like I don't, I'm not anticipating the consequences of this in the moment. So that may be a
Hmm.
fault, but the way I've done it, it seems like it's resonated with a lot of people. So um, if you have the ability to, not everybody has this like ability to, because for like people like us, we're kind of out on our own. We're not beholden to somebody else's biases and in
Right.
that they might create in the work environment that we're in. Um, if you have that ability, like you know, speak to it, because I guarantee there's people out there that have had certain similar things, and then maybe when you speak to it and then contextualize it and then add some science to it, add some data to it, add some research to it, it validates it for them, right? It's
Yeah.
like I'm not alone, not just because both of us have experienced it, but there's all this research
It's the
behind
data.
it that
Yep.
it's real. And so that's kind of like kept me going for I mean a certain amount of time. So I don't know if that's going to run out of but those are my ways of kind of like keeping going.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And Farzine, how can people connect with you?
Sure. If you like to kind of know more and just kind of see like some of my resources that I put out, my website is criticalequity.com. Critical Equity Consulting is my business. LinkedIn is where I'm most active. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, you can go and find my company and also see my company page. I post a lot there too. But all of like my upcoming engagements, appearances, webinars, or like training opportunities that I have through other organizations that are like kind of open to the public. I post a lot of them up there, and I have a few coming up, so you can kind of check it out. But yeah, LinkedIn's the best way to connect with me, and I accept everybody. So feel free to shoot a connection request or follow me if you don't feel comfortable.
Love it. Farzin, thank you so much for this. And I'm going to tell anyone that is watching this right now, please follow him because, like I said, I get life out of like his posts. Oftentimes I'm just like, yeah, that thing. Exactly. Right. So I appreciate your voice in this space. So thank you, Farzin. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to subscribe. You can get us here, right? You can get us here on YouTube, or you can follow us on your favorite podcast platform. So thank you for being here with us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.